The Precious Metals Week in Review, December 31st, 2015. Brought to you by Precious Metals International. Precious Metals International would like to wish you all a happy, healthy, and prosperous New Year. It was another shortened trading week due to the timing of the New Year holiday this year, but the week still saw some newsworthy events. The number of Americans filing new claims for state unemployment benefits surged last week, unexpectedly climbing by 20,000 claims to a new seasonally adjusted level of 287,000 for the week ending December 26. Economists had forecast claims only marginally increasing for the final weekly unemployment report for 2015 and were shocked by the sudden increase. Analysts immediately blamed the holiday period for the volatility in the data, but the U.S. Labor Department said in its report that there were no special factors influencing the numbers. The 4-week moving average, which is supposed to smooth out the week-to-week volatility in the numbers, also rose by 4,500 claims. In Japan, factory output dropped by 1% in November, the first such decline in 3 months. A separate report showed that retail sales also fell by 1% in November, year on year. Japan continues to struggle to reach a 2% inflation target set by the Bank of Japan. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's cabinet this week approved a record budget for fiscal year 2016 that approaches nearly $800 billion in spending. The budget appears to depend heavily on increased tax revenues due to rising corporate profits, thanks in large part to a weaker yen as U.S. dollar strength continues to benefit Japanese exports. China's parliament passed a widely controversial new anti-terrorism law on Sunday. The new law will require technology firms to divulge sensitive information such as encryption keys, which are used to keep communications private. The new law also allows for the Chinese military to conduct counter-terrorism operations overseas. Other provisions in the legislation restrict the rights of media, including social media, to report on details of terror attacks on the grounds that such reports could lead to further imitation-style attacks. Western nations have expressed deep concern over the provisions in the new law, saying that they could lead to the violation of basic human rights, such as freedom of speech, and could also allow the Chinese government to arbitrarily target any of its own citizens who speak out in protest. In Brussels, Belgium, the fireworks display to celebrate the new year was cancelled amid threats of an extremist attack. The city's mayor noted that 100,000 people turned out in 2014 to celebrate the new year and said, "In these circumstances, we can't check everyone." Earlier in the week, Belgian police conducted house searches, which resulted in the arrest of 2 individuals on suspicion of plotting just such an attack on New Year's Eve. During their search, police found military-style clothing and Islamic State propaganda, but no weapons or explosives. Other large populated areas such as London and New York were under severely heightened security measures as they prepared for their own New Year celebrations. In the United Kingdom, torrential downpours from massive winter storms have triggered extensive flooding in the northern areas of England. Analysts project that the economic impact to the UK from the event could reach as much as $2.2 billion as infrastructure and agricultural areas both saw heavy damage. In Ukraine, the central bank governor said on Wednesday that inflation in the war-torn country had hit 44% during 2015, nearly double 2014's figure. Ukraine is expecting to receive the third and possibly even fourth tranche of bailout funding from its $17.5 billion rescue loan package from the International Monetary Fund after Parliament successfully approved a budget for 2016. Russia, still suffering under sanctions for its actions in Ukraine, announced that its gross domestic product, GDP, fell by 4% in November, compared to a year ago. October also saw a decline of 3.7% in Russia's GDP. Russia's annexation of Crimea and the subsequent events that followed clearly had a direct impact on Ukraine's current economic struggles. Crude oil plunged again this week on yet another unexpected build in inventories and news that OPEC still intends to keep production at current levels for the foreseeable future. A storm in the North Sea acted to support prices later in the week, but oil remains mired in the mid-$30 a barrel range, with many analysts saying they expect it to move even lower. The euro traded sideways against the US dollar for the first part of the shortened week, but saw a short vertical drop on Tuesday. The euro traded sideways again from Tuesday's drop, but dropped lower again on Thursday. The euro will close the final week of 2015 lower against the US dollar. The Japanese yen saw some erratic moves this week, trending lower against the US dollar in a series of peaks and valleys until late Wednesday, when the yen began moving higher. The yen saw a sudden but brief vertical surge higher on Thursday, but could not sustain the momentum. The yen will close the final week of 2015 only slightly lower against the dollar. This week, we bring 2015 to a close and begin 2016 under a continued cloud of global geopolitical and economic uncertainty, but we hope that the new year brings you all health, happiness, and prosperity. The final trading day of 2015 saw the Dow Jones Industrial Average turn in a negative weekly performance, a negative monthly performance, and its first negative yearly performance since 2008. Reuters, citing sources familiar with the matter, said on Wednesday that the Obama administration is preparing new sanctions on international companies and individuals in response to Iran's ballistic missile test that it conducted in October. Iranian officials said that any further sanctions by the U.S. would violate the recent nuclear accord and said that it would accelerate its ballistic missile program in response to any such sanctions. The missile test was a clear violation of a United Nations Security Council resolution, but amazingly, apparently does not violate any of the conditions laid out in the nuclear accord reached earlier this year. In Saudi Arabia, where finances have been strained due to the continued low price of oil, the government announced that it would implement spending cuts and move to raise revenues from sources other than oil in 2016 in an effort to cut a record budget deficit running nearly $97.9 billion. Saudi Arabia made it clear that they expect to be able to wait out the oil crisis and keep oil production at current levels as OPEC continues its increasingly obvious campaign to squeeze out costlier oil producers such as the U.S. The ongoing humanitarian crisis resulting from the Syrian civil war and the aggressive expansion of the Islamic State continues to place a major strain on the economies and infrastructures of countries in Europe and will likely continue to do so in 2016. Many of the countries that are experiencing a flood of migrants who are fleeing the crisis in the Middle East are ill-equipped to take on the extra burden both economically and politically. Terror-related arrests in Europe, the US, the UK, and elsewhere around the world have also shown that extremism is not confined to the Middle East. Weather events, such as the floods taking place in England and the United States this week, will also likely strain the two economies that have been held up as bright spots in their recovery from the Great Recession, as agriculture, industry, and infrastructure all take damage from the weather. In a guest article for the German newspaper Handelsblatt, which was published on Wednesday, the head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, said that the prospect of continued interest rate hikes by the U.S. Federal Reserve in 2016 and the ongoing economic slowdown in China were contributing to global uncertainty and a higher risk of economic vulnerability. Ms. Lagarde added that global trade growth has slowed considerably and the decline in prices for oil and other commodities is posing problems for economies that are dependent on those commodities. The financial sector in many countries also still shows signs of weakness, particularly in emerging markets. Ms. Lagarde said, "All of that means global growth will be disappointing and uneven in 2016. Ms. Lagarde also warned that rising interest rates in the U.S. and a stronger dollar could lead to some firms defaulting on their payments, which could infect banks and states alike. In Puerto Rico on Wednesday, Governor Alejandro Garcia Padilla announced that the debt-laden U.S. territory would be able to make most, but not all, of nearly $4 billion in interest payments that are due on January 4th. The failure to pay all of the interest owed means that several bonds will officially go into default. The Commonwealth continues to urge the U.S. Congress to step in and offer some sort of rescue package. The European political landscape has become even more uncertain as anti-immigration and anti-austerity sentiment continue to grow. Spain struggles with its Catalonia region, which continues to threaten to secede, and an upcoming referendum in the UK could see Britain leave the European Union. Scotland will be eyeing that referendum on continued European Union membership closely, as it still considers its own exit from the United Kingdom. If Britain opts to leave the EU when the referendum is finally held, Scotland could resurrect its initiative to exit the UK on popular separatist sentiment. All of this means that it remains vital to monitor news in an increasingly globally connected environment. Avoid the temptation to be complacent this time of year and be prepared to take advantage of buying opportunities that could allow you to acquire additional physical precious metals products for your well-diversified investment portfolio at discounted prices. Remember that precious metals should always be viewed as a long-term investment, and that the key to profitability through the ownership of physical precious metals is to actually acquire and own the physical products and to hold them for the long term. Always remember that you should never overextend your ability to maintain ownership of your precious metals over the long term. The Precious Metals Week in Review, December 31st, 2015. Brought to you by Precious Metals International.